Okay, so our third and final presentation is by Hafeesha Thoppil Babu. Hafeesha is originally from India. She's a research postgraduate of social anthropology from the University of Sussex. She's an independent researcher with a keen interest in studying the Muslim community in India, as well as minority communities and Muslim women. Prior to completing her master's degree in media studies, Hafeesha worked as a lecturer of journalism in India for a year. She has conducted extensive research on indigenous communities in South India, producing scholarly works and presenting at various conferences. Notably, her work on tribal education as part of the International Year of Indigenous Languages has been published by UNESCO. Currently, Hafeesha is actively seeking a PhD in anthropology to further advance her career as an academic. And take a model from Orlean. It's good that you didn't do the presentation and you worked on your PhD idea. That's from me.
Good morning, everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank each and everyone behind the conference for their hard work and effort, and also all the participants of my interviews back in Kerala. So today I'm going to talk about the symbolic violence against Ahmadiyya Muslims in Kerala. So Kerala is a southern state of India, and I'm focusing on the Malabar region of Kerala, where the Ahmadiyya Muslims is predominant. So the aim of the study is, so even though egalitarianism is the basic principle of Islam, like stratification in Hindu society, groups can be seen among Muslims also due to their ideological differences. So this paper explores how dominant Muslims inflict symbolic violence against Ahmadiyyas, and focusing on the theories of Bourdieu, Galton, and how anthropologists treated both symbolic violence and structural violence in their studies. My work argues that certain forms of acts by dominant Muslims against Ahmadiyyas are symbolic violence that results in actual discriminatory practices. So, who is Ahmadiyyas? So, Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat is an Islamic revival movement founded in Punjab in India in 1889 by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. So Muslims usually believe in the arrival of Prophet Isa on the day of judgment. But the major distinction between Ahmadiyya Muslims and other Muslims groups are they don't believe in resurrection, and also they believe their Mahdi, the founder of the movement, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, as the Mahdi. Mahdi means the guided one. So the other Muslim group who believe in the finality of Prophet Muhammad reject these claims and consider them as non-Muslims. So Ahmadiyya Muslims spans over 148 nations, and you can read this. And in Kerala, it's 7,000.
Maybe the mouse. Press the mouse.
Yes. So in Muslim dominant countries like Pakistan, Indonesia, Bangladesh, and all, they are not allowed to practice religion by law, and there are lots of obvious physical violence. But to compare to Kerala in India, there is no physical violence except the few physical violence during the inception of Muhammad. Inception of the movement. And so literature review. So Ahmadiyyas as a religious minority. So the feeling of insecurity and the declining power of Muslims under British rule during the 19th century gave rise to many of the reformist movement among Indian Muslims. And the Ahmadiyya teachings came to Kerala, the southern part of India, particularly in the district of Kannur in 1896. And they established mosques all over the Kerala gradually. And the Orthodox Muslims groups in Kerala consider Ahmadiyyas as kafirs, that's heretics or imposters, due to their ideological differences, and they always remain as a isolated sect. And the religious reformation among the Muslims in Kerala happened due to two reasons. First, against the colonialism, and second, it's an internal reformation due to the different interpretation of Quran and practices. So, for example, Sunni Muslim groups always considered as the Orthodox Muslim groups, where they don't allow, like they still follow lots of old school of Islam. Where Mujahid groups, they are reformatory, they're a bit more reformatory, and they encourage women participation in education. They like encourage interpretation of Quran in different local languages and all. So Ahmadiyya is that like one of these reformatory movements, but when it comes to Ahmadiyya, all other groups like unitely oppose them and consider them as kafirs. So theoretical frameworks, I basically mainly use the idea of symbolic violence by Bourdieu. So the symbolic violence is same as any other form of violence, but implicitly practicing it implicitly, where both the agents and the victims of violence unaware of the violence inflicted. So that's how it remains acted as a symbolic violence. And in this context, only an observer outside the power relations can identify it as a form of violence. The idea of structural violence by Galton is a deprivation of basic human needs by social structures where the dominant group systematically subjugate other through various means. So similarly, anthropologists in their studies opine that symbolic violence is a naturalization of subordination of marginalized group through internalization of social inequality. So methodology, I employed qualitative research methodology in the form of telephonic and Zoom interviews. I really wanted to go back to India that time, but due to the COVID restriction, I couldn't go. So I have conducted everything online and through telephone. And there were 15 members consisting of all genders between the age group of 25 and 75, consisting of doctors, teachers, psychologists, housewife, and so and so. So Ahmadiyyas in the case of symbolic violence. So to maintain the routine of daily life, the power is exercised through symbolic violence rather than overt violence, thereby endowed with legitimize that it would not have otherwise. So it's not very obvious form of violence. It's not a very physical form of violence. For example, if I beat someone, it has some obvious thing. But if I cause someone a mental distress, it doesn't have a very visible impact. So in this context, no one identify it as a form of violence because it doesn't have any visible losses or yeah. So next I'm going to talk about the various the various modes they inflict violence. So first is word of mouth. So you know the word. So the other Muslims call Ahmadiyyas Qadiani. So Qadian is a place in Punjab in India where the Ahmadiyya movement started. So they connect them to the local place and derogatorily call them Qadiani. And they even coined the feminine word Qadianity by adding little with this. And it's a way of dominant Muslims show their arrogance, and they call them kafir. Kafir means non-believers. And also they call them kalanmar. Kalanmar means thief. So it's a very strategic way to construct an idea that Ahmadiyyas are imposters, therefore they destroy pure Islam. And family, and I'm not gonna read the quotes, you can read to save the time. So when someone from a dominant Muslim group convert to Ahmadiyya sects, what happened? The family cut their relationships. They don't eat with them. They don't talk to them. And where an incident was, one of my respondents' husband, he was supposed to perform the nikah, the marriage ceremony of his sister, but he was not allowed to do that because he converted into Ahmadiyya sects. And the other form, educational institution and symbolic violence. For example, one of my respondent, she was attending an interview for a role of teacher, but when the interview committee came to know she was from this community and she didn't get that job, and denying admissions, and in some of their modules in Islamic studies, they negatively portray Ahmadiyya Muslims and the founder. So by learning such things from school, it affects the well-being and mental health of kids, even from the pedagogy. social media as a violent platform. So it's comparatively a new phenomenon where the dominant Muslim groups use YouTube, Facebook, WhatsApp to negatively portray Ahmadiyya Muslims, spread hate speech against them, and all. Yeah. Denying opportunities and exclusion. It's more like a structural violence. So yeah, this the incident I mentioned. One of my interview we attended in school interview for becoming a teacher, but she couldn't get the job. And similarly, a first rank holder of a school, she didn't get an award because she was from this community. So other forms of symbolic violence are the arrogance of dominant Muslims was also shown symbolically. So one of my respondents, oh sorry, I forgot to mention, this is not real time, it's anonymous everything due to the sensitivity. So he says, so they consider as apostates when they see us, they still sees us by calling Qadiani and spit on the road. So they spit on the road as they spit on the faces of the people from Ahmadiyya community. So yeah, so there is a mosque in Calicut, it's in Kerala, where they have a board saying that Ahmadiyyas and dogs are not allowed inside. So in Islam, touching dogs is forbidden. So they're comparing Qadianis, Ahmadiyyas with dogs to propagate their arrogance against Ahmadiyya community. So how Ahmadiyyas interpreting this act of violence? So Ahmadiyya's notion of what they experience is arrogance but not violence. And for them, violence was something they experienced in the past during the inception of inception of the movement. But they often compare their life with the dominant Muslims. For example, recently in Pakistan, the Sunni Muslim groups destroyed a mosque of Ahmadiyya. So when they compare their life with other other Muslims, Ahmadiyya Muslims in Pakistan, Indonesia, and all, they feel like, okay, we don't have any violence, we don't have to face any violence, we have better life, and they just consider it's act of insult or arrogance. So, according to Bourdieu, symbolic violence is something that both the one who inflict the violence and the one who face the violence, they remain unconscious of the acts of violence. That's how it becomes symbolic violence. So in this context, none of them identify it's an act of violence, and that's how it becomes the symbolic violence. So and few respondents opined that verbal abuses are habitual for Ahmadiyyas, therefore they are prepared for it. And for majority of my respondents, what they undergo is insult but not violence. Even though they agree they face discrimination, exclusion, and inequality, none of them recognize them acts of violence. So this is how they internalize violence without being identified as violence. Now I'm going to look at how Ahmadiyyas respond to certain acts of violence. So sabur means patient. So Ahmadiyya believe that sabur is the way that indicate their response. So they believe that, okay, whatever happens to us, we will remain patient. So we will be really close to Allah. So that's what they believe. And my respondents said that it is mentioned in Quran that no matter what the situation one undergoes, a true believer should be patient as Allah will always be with them. So whatever they go through, they will be like, they don't react at all. They internalize the suffering, they internalize the violence. So believing this, they remain patient, normalizing their suffering for remaining true to Allah. So dua. Dua means pray. So dua is the most common way through which Ahmadiyyas mark their response. So my respondent said, whatever dominant Muslim do, they will always pray for them. So from my respondent's account, what I understand is they are more concerned about the life after death. They say Prophet Muhammad taught the Muslims that paradise is for those who don't respond to the maltreatment but forgive them and pray for them. So in Islam, there is a saying, as-sabr nisful iman. like if I'm not wrong, there are people here from Muslims, I think, is patience is the half of Islam, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, so they believe in that. Oh, sorry. So internalizing suffering is a way of responding as well. So it's a major reason for normalization of these kinds of violence acts. So one of my respondents said, true Muslims will always suffer. So when other Muslims mistreat us, we believe that we are the real Muslims. So Ahmadiyyas prefer to suffer, therefore internalize their subordination. So Islam views sufferings as either as a result of sin or a trial. This is so funny to see. Ahmadiyyas believe that, okay, we are the true Muslims, so that's what we are going through all these sufferings. So we are the true Muslims. That's Ahmadiyya side. But other Muslims say that they are suffering because they are committed to sin, and we are here to protect the true Islam from these imposters. So that's the conflict between their ideology. Now, conclusion. So in Bourdieu's philosophy, symbolic violence is exercised in implicit forms where both agents and victims remain unconscious of the violent acts. So considering the scenario of Ahmadiyyas, both dominant groups and Ahmadiyya remain unaware of the violence part and legitimate and internalize their position in the social hierarchy. According to Galton, violence emerges when human beings' potential, either corporal or mental, are not apprehended. So I would say it would have been just merely acts of arrogance as considered by Ahmadiyyas if it wouldn't result in any discriminatory practices that reinforces their lower position in the society. So violence is just not that's something that has obvious consequences or visible losses. So as I mentioned earlier, if I beat someone, it has some obvious consequences, but causing someone mental distress, it doesn't have any visibility. You know what I mean? So it's the form of violence, but it's not a direct form of or explicit form of violence, but they practice in a implicit way. So living with the feeling of inferiority in the fear of getting insult or hiding one's identity by internalizing a lower position in the social hierarchy indicates the power of dominant Muslim groups over Ahmadiyyas. That's why it becomes symbolic violence without being recognized.